What is MongoDB? At the highest level, MongoDB is a non-relational JSON document store. And we'll pull apart each of these terms to explain what MongoDB is. First, it's non-relational. And by non-relational, we mean that it doesn't support the relational algebra that's most often expressed as SQL. So, for instance, if you're familiar with Oracle or MySQL or SQL Server, you know that they support a relational algebra between the tables, and MongoDB does not support that. And it's a JSON document store. And by documents, we're not talking about Microsoft Word documents here, but we're talking about structured documents expressed using JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. So let's first start with what these JSON documents look like. Here's a JSON document. A JSON document starts with an opening brace, and then it has keys and values. So for instance, you might have a key of first name, and I'll put a quote around that, and my first name is Andrew. And there might be another key of last name, and my last name is Erlickson. And by the way, these are quotes around these keys and quotes around these values, and that's a comma between these fields, and that's a colon between the key and the value. So here we have a key, and here we have a value. And then we might have another key called hobbies, and in that we might have a list of hobbies. So for me, that would be cycling and golf and photography. And you can see here that I've expressed this as a list, so these square brackets indicate a list. And then we can close that document right here, the closing brace, and this document can be put directly into MongoDB, into what we call a collection. And MongoDB holds collections of documents, so this might be a people collection, for instance. So we say that it's a non-relational JSON document store. So this is JSON, and this is a JSON document, and this is something that you can put directly into MongoDB. Now, we also say that MongoDB supports dynamic schema, and some people say that it's schemaless. And what do they mean by that? So in particular, there could be a second document that you put into the database. For instance, I'll put one here with first name Jeff and last name Yemen. And let's say city of birth. I don't actually know where he was born, but I'll just say it was Boston. And then I'll leave out his interests. So MongoDB supports having documents in the same collection that do not have exactly the same schema. So for instance, this first document has a hobbies key with an array of hobbies, and the second document has a city of birth key, which my document lacks, and it doesn't have this hobbies array. And of course, as you all know, if you're familiar with relational, in the relational world, we've got these tables, and these tables contain columns like first and last, and maybe city of birth. But there's no way to store data in a different dimension inside a relational database. So this could hold Andrew, and it could hold Erlickson, and it could hold my city of birth, but it couldn't hold an array of hobbies. It could hold an ID, like a person ID, and there could be some other table that held my hobbies and that would be related to that. But you couldn't stick the hobbies into a list inside the same table. Now, what you may realize is that the way MongoDB stores these documents is a lot closer to the way that programs are written. Because often your programs are object-oriented and they have these hierarchical objects where you've got maps, and in those maps you've got lists, which are equivalent to arrays, which may have other maps inside them. And you can store one of those objects directly inside MongoDB. It can be serialized into these JSON objects, and within the database it's actually stored in something called BSON, which we'll get to later. And you can't do that in a relational database. In a relational database, you have to pull apart everything into its constituent pieces and put it into the various tables. One analogy is that if you were storing a car in a relational database, then you would take it apart when it came into the shop. You'd store all the doors in the doors table. You'd store all the steering wheels in the steering wheels table, and all the engines in the engines table. Whereas in MongoDB, you'd store the entire car often in one collection where there would be hierarchy within the documents expressing what's inside that object. Now, in creating this database, what we've done is we've also removed some features that you would see in relational databases. In particular, if there are two collections, let's say one of people and another one of cities and their properties, let's say, we don't support joins between them. So we don't have joins. So there's no way to query both of these together. We also don't have transactions, and we don't support SQL. And some people refer to this class of database as a NoSQL database for either it not supporting SQL or not only SQL, but we support something else. But I think that really the better way to describe MongoDB is as a document database, and in particular a JSON document database, because that's really what it is at the end of the day, a database that stores documents. Okay, so let's have a quiz. Which of the following statements are true about MongoDB? MongoDB is document-oriented, MongoDB supports joins, MongoDB has dynamic schema, and MongoDB supports SQL. Check all that apply.